Hey everyone, today I have the pleasure of hosting Dan O'Day, co-founder and CEO at Ecfx. Now, Ecfx is an automated electronic court filing notice management system for law firms and corporate legal departments. Now, Dan is a highly experienced executive who is both a lawyer and a programmer with over 25 years experience in the legal industry. Now, this is the first time we've had a legal tech founder on the show, so I'm very interested to see and hear about Dan's unique perspectives on everything SaaS. So with that said, Dan, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Shaheem. I'm really happy to be here and appreciate the opportunity to speak to the audience.
Absolutely. No, the pleasure is all mine. So Dan, let's dive in. Let's talk about the founding story of Ecfx.
Wow. So the founding story, I'll give a little background because this will help establish the foundation, if you will. Started in the legal world at the age of 16. I was old enough to drive a car, therefore well qualified to be a court runner. So my job was to run down the courthouse, get documents stamped, bring them back to the law firm, right? Went on to be a paralegal at Paul Weiss in New York and decided I would actually practice law. So I went to law school, got the degree, went out there, started practicing. And after about a year, I'm like, oh, this is really very adversarial. People are arguing with you all the time about everything, right? That's your job. And so I enjoyed the ideas and a lot of the intellectual aspects of the profession, but the argumentative side wasn't really my cup of tea. So I went into technology, and I had been a programmer since a young age and decided I would go into the legal tech world. And there I worked for a company called Elite, which was acquired by Thomson Reuters, worked there for many years, went on to do something after that. And while I was out there in the world talking to people about legal tech, I kept hearing, hey, Dan, I've got this problem with email notices. We're still handling these electronic notices the same way we handle paper notices. And this may be hard to believe for a lot of your listeners who are not involved with law firms or court technology. It has only been in the last couple of years that many courts have gone to electronic court filing.
Really?
Before that, it was all paper. And there are still many courts in the United States that are still paper. Yeah, so that's been a huge transformation. So courts go electronic, and then the firms are like, well, especially the IT people in firms are like, well, we should just be automating all of this, the rest of the process. We got it electronically. The whole process should now be automated. And it wasn't. It was pretty much the same exact process as if you'd been dealing with paper documents, except now I've got the PDF and I don't have to scan it in. I still have to distribute it to a team of people who need to know about it. I still need to put it into a document management system. I still need to update a docket or calendar team to make sure it gets on the calendar docket. And so saw a huge opportunity out there to go and automate all these steps.
Gotcha. So Dan, you mentioned that it's just the last 2 years, which is crazy. Like, it's so crazy to hear that, that a lot of courts have gone digital. But so taking a new technology to market in an industry that seems to be very slow to adopt technology, like, let's talk about that. I'm sure there are challenges.
There are, and of course, it's only been in the last year that legal tech has come into its own as a familiar term, legal tech. I mean, it was, maybe it's been around maybe for 5 or 10 years, but really for people to hear it like they hear fintech or ed tech or other techs, it's relatively recent. And that's in part because the profession has been rather slow to adapt to change. The legal profession is focused, when you practice law and you're a lawyer, you're taught this concept of precedent. There was a decision that's been made by the court, and that becomes the law. We follow the law so that we have rules and things are in order, and we don't change things every day. Well, that same mindset makes one naturally resistant to adopting new technologies, right? How did this always worked in the past? It's been working. It should work for us again. A lot of that resistance changed, obviously, with the COVID and the pandemic. Right. So that is what everyone has called the silver lining for the legal profession to what happened, was that all of a sudden these lawyers had to learn things like Zoom or whatever, online meetings. I think many of your listeners will have seen the cat video from a couple years back where the lawyer's like, I'm not a cat, judge, I'm not a cat, right? And he's got the cat image over
Yeah,
his face. And that, that is kind of a snapshot of what the legal profession was like. And then all of a sudden, a lot of lawyers' minds opened up to the idea of, wait, this tech could be really helpful. I don't have to go to the courthouse anymore. I used to spend an hour going to the courthouse, 20 minutes finding parking, going in, waiting until my hearing was happening. So you'd have an 8:30 hearing, but really there were 12 8:30 hearings. And so when they got around to you, they got around to you. And then they'd hear your thing, which was only about 15 minutes of the judge's time, and then you'd leave. Super inefficient process, super inefficient. Made much more efficient online. Oh, we're going to talk to you at 12:15, or we're going to send you a text message when it's time to get on with the judge, right? Way more efficient. And so when that started to happen, I think a lot of lawyers opened up to the idea of, well, maybe there are other areas where technology could improve our lives and make our lives easier. And on top of that, you had staffing shortages. Legal isn't the only industry that is experiencing this right now. There's a lot of industries. And staffing shortages also make the idea of automation attractive, right? Because literally no one can do
right.
no one's doing the job and needs to get done. So those are a lot of changes that I think have made it so that, yes, lawyers have been resistant historically to technology, and that is changing. And I hope it continues to change.
Fair enough. So did you start building this like during COVID, or were you building this before COVID and COVID came and you said, and then it just really helped your cause in that way?
So we built it. We're definitely building it before COVID. So the company was founded in January 2019. So a little over 3 years ago.
Right.
Going along, we launched our product in February 2020.
No way.
Yes. And so
The world
the
shuts
very
down.
next thing that happens in March is there's COVID. Now, at first, no one wants to talk to us because they're all focused on what is this Zoom and how do we get this running? I mean, they've got like the building is on fire. No one's coming to the office, but we're still getting mail. All sorts of logistics problems to work through. So it was a really, really hard year. That year, 2020, was a very hard year for the company. And for all you founders out there, it was one of those years where you're like, is this going to make it? I mean, I've got a dream, a vision, but is COVID going to be the end of all of this? Thankfully, had some people who would still talk to us during COVID, had signed up some pilots ahead of time. They kept moving forward with their pilots. We kept moving forward. And by the end of that year, oh yeah, people are talking. They're like, oh yeah, we need some more software. And that's when we saw the mindset shift. So it did not, at the beginning of COVID, it was just a reactionary, oh my God, I got to deal with this.
Right.
It took a good 9 months to a year for them to go, oh, this isn't so bad, and maybe technology is good. Right?
Yeah.
And so 2021 was a very healthy year for the company, and things really turned around then.
Nice. Well, that's good to hear. Was there any like specific strategy that you used in your go-to-market, or a specific way that you pivoted that you think, really lent to your success of surviving through COVID and then thriving afterwards?
I have to say that our unfair advantage as a company, there's that concept of unfair advantage, was that we had a lot of connections in the industry. And there were a lot of people who, as I mentioned, I was a paralegal. I practiced law. I was at Thomson Reuters for 20 years. I had built relationships over that career. And those relationships absolutely made it so that the company is alive today and could survive through COVID, because there were people who would return my phone call during COVID and set the meetings and agree to pilot the software and say, Dan, this is a great idea. I know that if you say you're going to do it, you're going to deliver it. And so that sort of relationship and people knowing that they can trust you was absolutely critical to the success of the company.
That's so powerful. I think every founder in the early stages, they try to leverage their network, but this really speaks to the importance of building your network as you go through your career. And wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, that's well said. That would, always be, not always be networking, but always when you're engaging with people, think whatever I do in this transaction is going to pay forward into a future transaction.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's huge. So I also saw, that right now, so ECFX, you've talked about the court system, and I definitely see like the amount of time that can be saved. I remember even like one time, so I used to get a ton of like speeding tickets when I was younger. So I remember one time I went and you have this option to just speak to a prosecutor and they'll reduce the fine and the whatever the charge was or whatever it is, right?
Yep.
And one time the specific phrase that she used was, okay, because you're saving the court time, I'm going to reduce it to this and reduce the amount to this. I was like, that's when I was like, oh, wow, like I guess I am saving the court time by just coming to the prosecutor. And this is like, and what you're talking about, like that, it's like that, but like amplified like a million times over, basically across all of the, legal processes.
Yeah, the courts are backlogged and they're jam-packed and they don't want to have to deal with things. And then you've got lawyers who are very busy. And yeah, time is a cost to many of them.
Exactly. And how is that translating over to the corporate side? I saw, on your website that that's the other market that you serve as well.
Yeah, so on the corporate side, there are, and it's not as common on the corporate side. So we're working with some insurance companies and some very large corporations because oftentimes corporations outsource litigation to law firms, but some corporations do some of the litigation in-house. And those that do litigation in-house have the same problem law firms have. I've got all these court notices. I've got to put them into systems. The beauty about corporations is they're already predisposed, if you will, to try to reduce costs and improve efficiency.
Fair enough.
Right. So law firms, sometimes we're focused more on the risk component and other components for law firms. Corporations, oh yeah, clear ROI. I mean, we literally have an ROI calculator that will show the prospect how much money they will save. And they can put their own values in. So they can say, well, this is our labor cost. This is our time to process. This is how many we process. There's our cost.
I love it. I love it. ROI calculators, by the way, for anyone listening in, I think that's a huge takeaway. It's a tool that doesn't get used enough. I feel like, yeah, very powerful.
I agree. And the other thing I would say to founders, especially if you're in the enterprise sales world where you're selling to organizations, is having a champion kit. So we've got like a series of PowerPoint and other tools that aren't just for the sales team, but you can give to that person internally who has to sell your product to others inside the organization.
I really like that. Yeah, I think like there are like buying guides that, a lot of corporations have, and they'll have one for like the CFO maybe, or have one for somebody else. But I like what you're saying is like give one to your champion to enable them to be able to sell internally. I like that. How did you what kind of things did you include in yours?
So, well, obviously ROI calculator, but also the process. So we have some slides that establish the pain point and stuff. And so we have some workflow slides, and they'll just substitute it in their own workflow, but you'll already have given them a PowerPoint slide that they can go change so that when they have to present to their management team, they substitute in their department for the department you had there, or the name of the person versus a generic position that you had in there. Right.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really it reminds me of so I had another founder on the show here, Nate, and his company is fluent.io, and what he's really building is literally a tool to do just that. It's to get you a seat at the buyer's table. What he did was he just one time in a sales enterprise deal, he made a Google Doc and shared it with the rest of the team that he doesn't actually get to talk to. And then over the next morning when he logged in, he saw all these comments from like all the other decision makers and what do they think about the proposal. And it's all in their words, but now he's at the table, right? So then he's built a tool around that now to enable your buyers to basically, I guess, buy for you or sell it for you, whatever. But yeah, so that's what it reminds
That's
me of.
usually how it works in a company. You've got one or two, you got a constituency that really wants it, but they've got to convince a whole bunch of other people that this is a good idea, because the natural state is not to change anything, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Dan, I'm really curious to hear what kind of legal advice do you have for SaaS founders?
Well, I will say this. I do not practice, but I will give you a couple pieces of advice as it relates to things. If you're looking to be a venture funded company, or you're ultimately looking for a clean exit, keep it simple. start out as either a Delaware C Corp or potentially California C Corp, but keep it simple. Don't pick an obscure state that no one knows the law in, because that just makes lawyers nervous. So Delaware C Corp or California C Corp. The other thing I would say to early founders is get good counsel. Obviously, this is the future, and yes, it will cost money, and it depends on where you go, how much you will spend. We had good counsel starting out, and then we eventually even went to our current law firm is Cooley, and they're wonderful counsel. They're well known, well respected in the VC community, and they are expensive, just to be quite frank about it, right? But you don't have to use a Cooley. You just need to use somebody with a good reputation and good quality experience. You want experience in startup, especially if they've helped with an exit before. If you're looking for an exit, if that's where your head's at, think ahead to that to make sure that you have a good foundation for that. If you're thinking more of a lifestyle company, like I just want to bring money in and I'm going to live off that money, LLCs and S corps and other structures make more sense for those kind of businesses.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I guess these are some of the things that like people don't necessarily consider when they're first starting out, and then they deal with it later on. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So Dan, let's talk about the future of legal tech. Like, where do you see your specific niche evolving into, or how do you see your product evolving in that space?
Yeah. So, I mean, electronic court filing is just one of many workflows inside a law firm, right? And so, we're looking at a couple growth vectors. One growth vector is logical product expansion, adding the ability not just to deal with the new filings, but go back and get the old filings, or, the ability to add, right now you can add clients and other people, but enhancements to that, the ability to do more advanced searching, those kinds of things, which is, pretty obvious stuff. But in addition to that, there are other workflows in a law firm that are painful, that our tool could extend and automate. Medical records is one we're looking at. We are so a lot of law firms deal in things that involve personal injury, for example, or asbestos, where they're dealing with a lot of medical records, and that process could be automated a lot more as well. Another example is we automate the process of dealing with the ITC notices, the International Trade Commission. The International Trade Commission is not a court per se. It's technically a government. It's a body. They deal with multi-billion-dollar cases. They call them investigations. But it's really, you've got to keep checking in. They don't tell you when something happens. You got to go and look, oh, did something happen? And so that process of monitoring things that we can do automatically for firms helps reduce labor, helps reduce effort, makes their lives easier.
Gotcha. So just trying to expand the use cases out to different areas of the industry. And how do you see legal tech? Like, what do you see the future of legal tech? Let's say like 20 years, from now.
So much to the chagrin of some people, there will still be lawyers. Absolutely. And they will be out there. I do not see a future where the lawyer is replaced by some sort of automated robot judge or automated robot advocate. And I don't know that anyone would want that. But I do see a lot of the mundane manual tasks being reduced. I mean, that's ultimately what technology is about. Taking mundane things and automating them, right? The first story of that first ENIAC machine that was sold to General Motors by IBM, story goes that there were 600 people at General Motors who did nothing but tally up the payroll for all the other employees. That's all they did all day in and day out, is add up the numbers for the payroll, right? That's not a rewarding job in my mind, right? We should get rid of the parts of our jobs that are not rewarding and replace them with automation. I think that's true for everyone. And ultimately, we get more kind of Maslow's self-actualized on the hierarchy of needs, and we're not doing mundane, repetitive stuff. This just makes the human race, puts us in a better place.
Yeah, fair enough. So as we wrap this up, Dan, like, what is one piece of advice that you would leave to early stage founders listening in?
So this piece of advice came to me from one of my mentors, Alan Rich, who's been very successful and has many successful businesses. He's currently one of the co-founders of Y Meadows, and he's had some very nice exits. He said, no good has ever come from speaking ill of others. And everyone knows when you have an attitude where they know they can trust you, you're not saying anything negative behind their back. You're just this person who says, this is how I feel and this is what I think. And I would love to say that I always follow that rule, but I do my best to.
I love that. That's a very unique piece of advice. And yeah, like I come from like a completely like sales background, and that's like a very important rule in sales, right? Like never bad mouth the competition, right? You just lose trust. Like people don't trust you anymore. Like, what do you mean? Like, yeah. So I totally get it. But in general, in life, it just makes you a more it shows integrity as a person. So
I agree completely. And I've instructed the entire team of Salesforce culture. Everyone is like, our competitor. I actually know the founder we have really effectively one competitor, and like, I know the founder. They're good people. They've got a decent product. We've got different focus areas, and there's different things that we have strengths in, and they have strengths in. And I think if you're interested in our strengths, then we're a better choice. It's up to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome, Dan. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on our show. If our listeners wanted to connect with you, where can they find you?
They can find me at dan.oday, O-D-A-Y, at goecfx.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you, Shaheem. Really appreciate it.